Hello everyone, today we're diving into the 18th corner of the galaxy we've covered so far, ironically for the 19th Legion. And once again, this world encapsulates a slightly different flavor of grimdark hope, if you can really call it that. So we're heading straight to the Segmentum Tempestus, specifically the Farsar sector, to look at a place that started as a literal death trap and became the cradle of one of the more interesting chapters of the Imperium. I'm talking about a world within the Kavahir system. I'm talking about a barren, airless ball of rock, once known as Lycris, which the galaxy now refers to as Deliverance. To understand why this place matters in the galactic scale, you have to understand the general vibe of its neighbor. Now, imagine you're looking up in the sky and see Kaivahar. It's a massive, polluted forge world run by the scummiest tech guilds this side of Necromunda, who essentially treat human beings like disposable batteries, and this went on for a long time. Deliverance at this point wasn't called Deliverance, rather Lycris, and it was a mineral-rich moon where the undesirables of the world, the criminals, political exiles, the very 40k concept of a slave, which is somehow even worse than a regular slave, because not only do you risk being owned by someone, at any moment in time, you as a slave can be turned into a servitor, which is a nightmare as you're locked in your body while pistons and programming moves you like a sock puppet. And they were all sent to die while digging up the resources for the world below. They lived in these fragile forced domes, which were just constantly one mechanical failure away from sending the entire colony that they were a part of into the cold, unfeeling vacuum of space, all the while being watched by overseers from a massive black tower, which functioned as a literal panopticon. While this might feel like a classic setup for an ultimate haves and have-not situation, it was actually worse, because even the haves had not. But then, the narrative of the world's entire history shifts, and things get a little different, as Corvus Corax, Primarch of the 19th Legion, enters the scene. And the change he did wasn't just a generational shift, it was literally revolutionary in every sense of the word. He did not just walk in with an army, he united the oppressed workers of the world. He took these people who had nothing but their mining tools and a lot of built-up aggression, then pulled an Angron, leading a full-scale insurrection against the Tech Guild. When they finally won and kicked the overseers out of the Black Tower, they didn't just celebrate, they renamed the entirety of the moon to Deliverance. This was meant to be a powerful sign of what was to come, since from here they would be delivered onto freedom. This was actually one of the few moments where a Space Marine Primarch actively worked to liberate the world completely. Fast forward a little bit and Corax's resistance is still going on, but now it's not just on one world, it's between Deliverance and Kaivar. Eventually, the Emperor finds his son, Corvus Corax, and with a little push, Corax is able to overthrow the guild completely and institute a new government, one which would be integrated into the Imperium fully, and the moon itself, where Corax started his whole shindig, would become the home of the Adeptus Astartes Legion, known as the Raven Guard. The base of operations of which would be a massive black spire, the one which the overseers from the tech guilds used to use, and it would be renamed into the Raven Spire. Basically, it was a pre-built fortress monastery for the Legion. And now Deliverance is still a harsh, airless rock, but it's become a powerhouse between the moon's mining complexes and the industry of Kaivar below. This system is able to pump out as much, if not more so, machinery, war personnel, and equipment than a fully dedicated Forge world. And thanks to the Raven Guard, they don't play around with defense. On the dark side of the moon, they were even able to add black shine roundabouts. These aren't just walls, it's a literal maze. We're talking about a network so massive and so filled with anti-air, batteries, hidden bunkers, false ramparts, all designed by the Raven Guard, that it would make the Imperial Fist proud. If you're an invader, you're not just going to be fighting soldiers, you're going to be walking into a little giant death puzzle. And luckily enough, they needed those defenses, as by the end of the 41st millennium, specifically 996-999 M41, this world became unfortunate enough to be in the direct path of Garka. But that's a story for later. So to dive in deeper, let's look into what life is actually like, or at least was, in Lycris, before it became known as Deliverance. And it's honestly a rather complex nightmare. Not as harsh as some others, but in no way, shape, or form is the world anything but dystopian. The tech guilds didn't just use the moons for minerals, they also used it as a dumping ground. If you were a criminal, any type, from the vile scum that even the emperor wouldn't tolerate, to somebody jaywalking, or if you just couldn't hit your production quotas, which, let's be real, in the 40k setting, that's basically impossible to hit. You were shipped off to the moon, and it was meant to be a literal death sentence. You were to live underground in these cramped, suffocating tunnels that could collapse at any moment, digging through the rock and mire while the overseers just watched you from this massive, terrifying black tower that loomed over everything. Rather than having a bunch of different facilities, they functionally created a moon-sized panopticon, where the fact that you were being watched 24/7 at all times, no matter what you did, was enough to keep you generally in line. And the conditions on this moon were absolutely gut-wrenching, even by 40k standards. We're talking about massive industrial accidents being a daily occurrence, and an atmosphere so polluted, children were born sicker than cancer patients. And there was no escape, as the only exit was through the same black spire that was used to control you. Once you were sent to the mines, that was it. You were a slave until the day you died or became a servitor. Which fate is worse is up to you to decide. In that kind of darkness, you either give up or you pray for a miracle. And for the people of Lycris, that miracle would finally show up. But it didn't come in the form of a traditional angel. He was a child with skin as white as snow and eyes like coal. Now this is where the lore gets a little legendary and vague, which is classic for this era of the Imperium, as within the Raven Guard's own records, there is not a 100% clear depiction of these early days. But what we know of this pale youth is that he was raised within those very tunnels by the slaves that were constantly sent up there. His name would become Corvus Corax, which in the local tongue translates to the Deliverer. That's a lot of pressure to give a child on the day they're born. Even when you're a Primarch and growing up literally as a demigod crawling out from a hole darker than black, that's a tall bill of sales for you to have to deal with, as your name literally tells you what everyone expects of you. Now, Corax didn't just sit around. He took what would eventually become the Raven Guard's DNA. The stealth, the strategy, the hit them where it hurts and get out before you're seen mentality. And he weaponized the slaves' own tools and knowledge of the area. He turned a group of broken miners into a revolutionary force that didn't just protest, but rather they launched a full-scale revolt against the Kahavaran garrison. And they didn't just win, they broke the entire system of the moon in one go. By taking the moon, they not only freed those upon it, but they broke the supply chain of ore and rendered Kaivar's economy functionally defunct. Now the masters on the planet down below couldn't quite handle this, so a civil war just broke out all across the planet between the different factions within the tech guilds, all because the bottom line vanished overnight. Eventually, the Great Crusade catches up with this area of the galaxy in 922 M30. When the Emperor finally shows up, he finds his long-lost son, and you'd think he'd immediately be, yes, I'll let you join, and we'll take this planet and make it bigger and better than ever. But Corax was a man of the people, and he wouldn't just leave his followers behind. He actually attempted to negotiate with the Emperor, and he agreed to join in the crusade, but only if the Emperor promised to bring an actual standard of peace and stability to the people of Kaivar. The result would be a bittersweet compromise. The Mechanicum would take over Kaivar once again, since technically it was an ancient colony of theirs, but the regime on Deliverance was overhauled and allowed to have a large amount of sway over what happened on the planet to make the conditions, well, relatively better in 40k terms. The industry quickly started back up, however, the slaves were gone, and that Dark Tower, that monolithic symbol of oppression, where the overseers used to sit and watch their slaves suffer, well, Corax took it over and renamed it the Ravenspire, becoming the home for the 19th Legion, turning that monument of misery into a veritable fortress for the Imperium's premier Watchers in the Night. So now that we know how Corax flipped the script on the tech guilds and established his power base on his homeworld, let's look at what the Kahivar system looks like in the modern era, in particular during the Indominus Crusade, and it's basically this massive two-part engine of war. You've got the moon, Deliverance, which is still barren. They haven't fixed that. And it's absolutely honeycombed with mining structures. And then you have the planet below, Kaivar, a massive hive world that's been converted to utter and complete overload of fabrication, with millions upon millions of plants and billions upon billions of workers, constantly working to churn out more and more equipment for the war effort. Together, these two worlds have produced so much high quality gear, including weapons, tanks, engines, vehicles, aircraft, munitions, that they have basically come to be on par with your average Forge world. But in the classic grimdark 40k twist that just has to be everywhere, the world is so polluted that the mutation rate amongst workers is higher than what the ecclesiarchy usually allows. Normally, the Inquisition would be all over that world, since there's more mutants there than there's cancer-stricken individuals in Baal. But on the other hand, the gear they produce is of such high quality and is so heavily needed by the Imperium that along with the fact that they have a whole Space Marine chapter protecting the world, one of the first founding chapters of a loyalist Primarch protecting the world, has led the Imperium to basically look the other way, because they really need those bolters and they need an internecine civil war even less. It's a perfect example of how the Imperium has recently become much more of a pragmatist system, overriding the old fanatical laws and edicts because of the sheer ungodly need of them being constantly assaulted from every direction by worse and worse threats. The Raven Spire itself is where things get really interesting. It is one of the largest natural structures on the entirety of the moon, but it doesn't look all shiny and gold-plated like most other fortress monasteries. It doesn't even look like a Gothic cathedral in a similar manner that the First Legion has theirs. In fact, it looks incredibly beat up and almost like it wasn't maintained. However, that is on purpose. Corax and his boys aren't slobs. Corvus Corax actually decreed that the wounds that the tower took during the original rebellion should never be repaired, as a perpetual monument to the slaves who died winning their freedom. Today, the Raven Guard have only a few hundred Marines there at any one time, so the spire is actually quite empty. There are entire sections of this fortress monastery that are completely and totally caked in dust, where the only thing you'll hear for hours upon hours is the death rattle clicking of robed servitors patrolling the halls. This is not a place of pomp, glamour, circumstance, or even artistry. It's functional, silent, and haunting. And if you're quiet enough, you can almost hear the whispers of nevermore. But if you're really into the Raven Guard, we have to look at the Ire and the Forbidden Apothecarian. The Ire is the tallest tower in the spire, and it was Corax's personal roost. I mean, it's a little heavy on the bird theming, but what Primarch isn't going overboard with their theme? This place is currently kept under stasis fields and is only opened in absolute emergencies. People say they attempt to communicate with Corax's spirit there, but nobody will talk about what they've actually found once they exit. There's a litany of parchments strewn about, with thick black scrawls upon their surfaces, which make no sense. And the longer you look at it, the more and more illegible nonsense you can find written upon them. This allows the Marines, or anyone who enters realistically, a terrifying glimpse into the Primarch's descent into obsession, madness, and warped shenanigans. Then, deep beneath the moon, there is the Forbidden Apothecarian. This is where Corax tried to speedrun the creation of Proto-Primaris Space Marines after his legion was nearly wiped out during the Dropsite Massacre. And like anything in 40k, it went absolutely terribly wrong in every way, shape, and form. He ended up creating mutated abominations that he was eventually forced to put down himself in an act of mercy, as these poor souls were living miserable excuses for an existence. Even though it's been purged, the legend still says that on Far Moon Night, you can still hear the bestial howls echoing through the tunnels, those from some of the most loyal the Raven Guard has ever created. Power that came not from a desire, but rather from a need. The Raven Guard's elite first company literally constantly stands guard at the doors in order to make sure that whatever is down there, be it memory or spirit stays put. Now we can move on to talk about how the regular people of Deliverance and Carvar actually live. Unlike a lot of chapters who treat the human protectorate like dirt or chattel, the Raven Guard actually have a close bond to their locals. They go so far as to train the Planetary Defense Force at the Black Shine roundabouts. And these aren't just going to be normal soldiers. They're trained in the Raven Guard's very own tactics. They use mazes, hidden strongpoints, false ramparts, all to make invaders' lives a living hell before they get sent to literal hell. And lucky for them, since they've really needed it, as Deliverance has been the target from everything between an Orc Wa to a singular splinter of the Hive Fleet Kraken. This is to the point that they've even had the 13th Penal Legion, the Last Chancers, fighting on the surface in order to hold back wave after wave of Tyranids. And with a Great Rift now open, the moon is more isolated and under an unbelievable amount of danger, to the point that no other time in history for the Raven Guard's recruitment grounds has ever been as perilous. But if there's one group of people who know just how to survive in the darkest depths, it's the ones who live in the shadow of the Raven. And since I've mentioned it multiple times while talking about the Raven Guard's Homeworld, let's dive in a little bit deeper into the Raven Spire. And you have to look at the parts of the spire that haven't changed since it was first formed. Take the red level, for example. Back when the tech guilds ran the show, this was a nickname for the prison and interrogation cells within the moon proper. It was a place of absolute, complete, and total misery. After the liberation, the Raven Guard kept the name as a reminder of what they would let happen nevermore. And what of the people that went through? Well, interestingly enough, there have been a few traitors to the chapter over the millennia. It happens to the best of them. So it's been in use, but we don't officially know if these cells have officially held a prisoner since the end of the heresy. Then you have the Carnivalis. This is a massive hall at the very bottom of the spire, where thousands upon thousands of legionaries used to gather to feast and, well, it sounds like Carnival. Basically, it's Carnival, but for the Raven Guard. So a little bit grunge. And they would often gather to hear Korax speak, or prior to preparing for large mobilizations. But the coolest part about this is that it's functionally a giant disorganized museum, as the walls are utterly, completely, and totally cluttered with trophies, relics of wars, skulls of enemies, current, extinct, and extinct. And the Raven Guard kind of hint at maybe being related to the Magpies in some way, shape, or form, because they'll take almost anything that is bolted down at times, including entire walls from citadels they've conquered. One Imperial historian went so far as to joke that it's a veritable magpie's nest. So the Blood Ravens might actually just be descended from the Raven Guard. Who knows? It's a weirdly chaotic, if you will, collection of victory trophies. Now, if you want to see the darker side of what the revolution went through within the Raven Spire, you have to look at Wing 7 and Wing 8. This is where the grim and grimdark really hits when involving the Raven Guard. Wing 7 is a blackened, burnt ruin. During the uprising, a prison guard corporal literally set the main gas lines on fire and locked 4,000 inmates, mostly the extremely young and elderly, to be cooked as if they were pizza, as a reprisal for the rebels' actions. Upon seeing this, Korax ordered that the ruins be left exactly how they were. No repairs, no cleaning, as it should stand as a permanent memorial to the innocent dead. Wing 8 is the opposite side of the coin. It's where Korax actually grew up amongst the political prisoners. This is where the rebellion was planned. To get there, you have to bypass the 12th gate, which is still covered from the scars of the bombs that guerrilla fighters used to collapse the archway during the war. There's even a small shrine built for Nerfum Sult, a 13-year-old girl who sacrificed herself in order to trap the guards and keep them away from the central spire. It's these small human stories of sacrifice that have made the Raven Guard feel more human than, well, their pre-reunification Terran kin, differentiating them from the space monks in power armor, or the space vampires in power armor, or the space crusaders in power armor. vibe that other chapters give. Looking down from the moon, you see the planet Kavar, and the scale of industry is staggering. We're talking about billions upon billions upon billions of workers in these massive hive cities, and the fabrication output of this is staggering to say the least. It indeed does outpace many a Forge world. However, this comes at a heavy cost, as the atmosphere is so toxic from unending pollution that the mutation rate is completely out of control. Normally, the Adeptus Ministorum would have a field day purging the population because even Necromunda looks normal by comparison. But because the system produces the highest quality of war machines outside of Mars proper, and because the Raven Guard are one of the first founding legions who are standing watch over the planet, they get a pass. It's not fair, but you tell that to the giant Raven-themed Space Knights, who are really good at guerrilla warfare somehow. And while the system has 4 moons, only Deliverance is inhabited. The others, Phosphis, Melroy, and Nicmetus, are just classified as dead worlds. Standing silent watch, probably booby-trapped to hell by the Raven Guard, just in case. Now, it is important to note that the time after the Raven Guard took power wasn't all peaceful, as even when Corax won his revolution and the Emperor arrived, the troubles for Deliverance and the world it orbited weren't over. During the Horus Heresy, the system faced one of the biggest tests they would ever be beset with, an internal rebellion. But this wasn't a grassroots uprising of the people. It was a psyop orchestrated by the Alpha Legion, also known as the Sneaky Boys, the guys who don't know if they're loyal traitor or if they're traitorously loyal or loyally traitorous, who attempted to dismantle Corax's authority from the inside out, using the planet's own history of rebellion and their hate of tyrants against itself. In the end, Corax managed to crush the insurgency, but it served as a reminder that even a world born from a revolution was never safe from what hid in the shadows. Between the scorched ruins of Wing 7 and the Magpie's Nest, the Raven Guard seemed to value memory almost more than any other chapter. The question does arise, do you think they're keeping these wounds open to bleed it out, digging deeper just to throw it away? Or are they just stuck in the mire of trauma from the past? And at the end of the day, when you look at Deliverance, you aren't just looking at an industrial cog in the Imperium's machine. You're looking at a monument to the fact that in the 41st millennium, the price of freedom is never actually fully paid. It's written in the soot of fabrication plants and the permanent scars on entire worlds. Corvus Corax could have built a golden palace. He could have wiped away all the grime of his slave years, and even pretended it never happened. But instead, he chose to keep those wounds open. He chose to live in the tower that still smelled like the smoke of revolution, despite him working for the embodiment of a tyrant. One who believed himself to be a benevolent tyrant, but a tyrant no less. It's beautiful in a weird, slightly spooky kind of way. A literal intersection between hope, drama, and trauma, which makes the Raven Guard somewhat of a fascinating chapter, despite their entire theme being designed to make them feel hidden in the background. They are the Emperor's shadow, but they were born from the light of a common man's uprising. Functionally, they remind many within the Adeptus Astartes that even amongst the demigods and the cosmic horrors, one of the most powerful forces in the galaxy can be a single soul standing at the gate while a group of miners who decided they'd rather die on their feet than live in the dark. It's not just right, it's just. Now, if you've enjoyed this deep dive into the 19th Legion's Homeworld, or Home Moon, be sure to hit that like button, as it really helps this channel climb out of the YouTube algorithm's basement. Leave a comment in the comments section down below, letting me know what else you'd like to hear about. And if you want to stick around for more deep dives or learn more about both the Grimdark and the Grimdark history of Warhammer, subscribe and hit that bell icon.